everyone, and thanks for showing up for my master class on IT security. Roger Grimes, that's me. I'm Roger Grimes. Teaches phishing mitigation, and this is I think we're going to be with each other for the next hour, and this is every single thing I could think of to help you fight social engineering and phishing. It's all kinds of stuff. It's a lot. It's like 86 slides. It's rapid pace, and really it's to try to give you an exposure to all kinds of different things that you could be doing. If you haven't met me before, I'm Roger Grimes, been doing computer security going on 35 years now. I've written 13 books and over 1,300 magazine articles, and probably at least 100, 200 of those articles on how to fight social engineering. There's some of my books where and most of them I'm talking about how to fight social engineering for one thing or another. I worked for KnowBe4. We're the world's largest integrated security awareness training and simulated phishing platform vendor, which means we try to help people not to be phished. So this is a topic that we talk to people about every single day. And this presentation is kind of we'll talk about, I have an ebook where if you didn't want to be bored by me in person or on video, you could go read the ebook. But this is the kind of the video presentation of that. But again, this is kind of like everything that we could think of how you might fight phishing, or at least everything I could tell you in an hour over 86 slides. It's going to be talking about building a comprehensive defense in-depth plan, what policies you need, what technical defenses and controls you need, how to implement fantastic security awareness and other real-life hints. And we're going to, again, what I'm trying to do is just expose you to all kinds of different things. I'm not going to spend too much time on any one topic. Most topics, just a slide or two. Maybe the most I'll cover is maybe 4 slides for a particular topic, but like an inch deep and a mile wide, basically. But it's everything that you can do to try to prevent phishing. And if you go to that link on the screen there's a previous version of this webinar. This is kind of like the second major edition. But if you, again, wanted to read this, or if you want to read an ebook about this instead of listening to a 1-hour webinar, there's a link to our comprehensive anti-phishing guide, or you can do both. You can watch this webinar and then download that PDF and have it in your hands as well. But a big part of the idea here is to understand that in order to protect yourself and your devices and your organization and your networks, you have to figure out how hackers and malware break in. And I've already done that research for you. There's the 13 different ways that all hackers and malware have ever broken into any device or any network. Those are the 13 ways. I've been doing this again for decades. There's never ever some new type of attack that doesn't use one of these 13 initial root access methods. And the way that you can best defend yourself and your devices and your organization and your networks is to figure out which of these 13 initial root access methods are most likely to be used successfully against you or your organization or devices or network, and then try to mitigate them. So that's what we're here to talk about today. That's what I'm going to give you today. But if you didn't know it, almost all hacking involves one of two things, really almost one thing. 70 to 90% of all successful hacking involves social engineering of some sort. Somewhere between 20 or 40% of successful hacking involves a hacker exploiting unpatched software. And then everything else added up all together only amounts to less than 10% of the attacks. Just two things, let me say, since the beginning of computers. So 5 decades ago, social engineering was the #1 way that people were attacked back in the early days of computers. If they were attacked, unpatched software for a while during the 1990s and early 2000s kind of took over as the #1 way. Then we went back to social engineering, and it's been there ever since. But basically, if you want to stop hackers and malware, you have to stop social engineering and patch your software. If you don't do those things, you're probably not going to stop hackers or malware. Yes, there's other ways that you could be successfully attacked, eavesdropping, password guessing, physical attacks, misconfigurations, that sort of stuff. But the vast majority of the risk, 70 to 90%, and really it's probably 90 to 99% of the risk, is due to social engineering and unpatched software. And every other type of attack just doesn't equal that much. So, and if you're not sure, I've got links here where you can read more about that. But the idea is that you have to develop a comprehensive defense in depth plan to fight hacking and malware and to fight social engineering. And the way that you do that is you develop your best defense in depth combination of policies, technical controls, and training. And you're going to do that to try to prevent bad things from entering your devices or networks. You're going to create those things to try to have what's called early warning and detection and quick response if a bad thing gets past your preventative controls, and then quick response and recovery if something does get passed. But the idea is that you need to create the best defense in depth set of policies. And a policy would be something like, lock your computer when you're calling from your desktop, never change banking information in the system without verbally confirming it with a legitimate requester, never give your password in response to an email. Those are policy things that you can do to try to prevent the risk of social engineering. And then technical controls are all the things that you try to implement, software, hardware, firmware, to prevent social engineering from getting to your end users. So that would be, secure operating systems, secure configurations, content filtering, your antivirus endpoint detection response software, all those things you can do to try to prevent your end user from having to be, having to mess with social engineering at all. But no matter how great your policies are, no matter how great your technical defenses are, you're always going to have some amount of social engineering badness get past those things and get to an end user in a given month. And they're going to have to be making a decision. And you want to train them on how to recognize social engineering, how to make sure they mitigate it and don't respond to it inappropriately, and how they report it for your organization. So again, I call this the 3 pillars of the three by three computer security pillars. But again, you want to make your best defense in depth combination of policies, technical controls, and training to prevent bad things from entering your environment, to detect something if it has got past your preventative controls, and then quick recovery if you do detect something going wrong. That's how you practice and do cybersecurity. And again, what I'm going to talk about today, this defense in depth plan, are the policies you can implement, at least some of the policies. We're going to talk about a selection of technical controls, and then best practice security awareness training and some other hints that we've learned along the days. So to start off with your needed policies, every company should have an acceptable use policy. And if you don't, you need to go on the internet and download an example one and modify it and get everybody to sign it. But you should have this if you don't already. But every employee and subcontractor that comes to interface with the systems in your company should have to read, review, and then sign an acceptable use policy, at least when they're hired or contracted, and then annually thereafter. It's a more general policy that just kind of talks about what is allowed or not allowed with computers, such as you could define what personal use is allowed, how you can't send cuss words or pornography or something in your, on the email system. It's about locking your desktops. It's about using good, strong passwords if you use that. And even like if your company allows people to log on with a username and password, one policy might be you should use a unique password for our systems and not share it with any other system. There's no other way to enforce. There's no technical control that would prevent an end user from using the same password on your system and then using it somewhere else. The only way to try to stop and mitigate password reuse is a policy where you're trying to tell people, no, the password for our system should be unique and not used anywhere else if you use passwords. Hopefully you can use multi-factor authentication so that you don't have to worry about the password reuse. So everybody, again, should already have an acceptable use policy that's more general in nature about IT systems. Usually, 3 to 10 pages or something like that, has a lot of information in it, and it's not just about social engineering and phishing. But you should also have specific phishing mitigation policies. Social engineering and phishing is the #1 way that most environments are compromised. And because of that, you need to make sure that your end users are educated about social engineering and phishing, and that there's specific policies for it that talk about, the company or the organization's concern about phishing and social engineering, how you're going to educate people to fight it. And then even about hopefully simulated phishing testing and things like that. most companies do not have specific phishing mitigation policies, but they should. If phishing and social engineering is the number one way that most companies are hacked, it would seem to me that every organization should have a specific phishing mitigation policy that addresses it specifically, and you have your users read and sign. And hopefully you're doing. We recommend that you do some small trainings at least each month, and you have users review that sort of stuff. And of course, you're going to have security awareness training documents and content that helps train people of how to avoid the social engineering phishing badness. And you may even want a policy document that talks about consequences if somebody fails a real phishing event or fails a simulated phishing test. At KnowBe4, we actually cover, like, I think through the 8th or not, like if you fail a whole bunch of phishing tests. Let me say, I've been with KnowBe4 over 5 years. Out of over 250 tests, I've failed a handful of simulated phishing tests. And we actually define what happens if you fail the first test, second test, third test, fourth test, fifth test in a particular year. And I'll share some of those things that we do, but we address it, and we don't say we're firing you right away, because anybody can be a victim of social engineering or fall for a simulated phishing test. Again, you want to have an acceptable use policy. You want to educate your users, and most people don't do this, but you want to educate your vendors and contractors. They should also have to review and approve your acceptable use policy. And again, if you don't have one, there's a lot of samples on the internet you can download and modify to use for your own company. And I have a link there where you can download a sample acceptable use policy. Again, unfortunately, most acceptable use policies do not include phishing and or how to fight phishing and that sort of stuff. It should. Your acceptable use policy should include a phishing mitigation section that people have to review and sign updated annually. Because again, it's such a big risk to every organization. You may even want to add a section on employee monitoring. Most companies in the U.S. and other places will have some language in their acceptable use policy on whether they monitor or can monitor employees, like monitoring their email or their messaging or their activity or network packets or something like that. In some countries, it's required by law that you let employees know that they're being monitored. And in the U.S., it's allowed as long as you tell the employees that you're doing it. But you may want to add, sometimes even in some countries and industries, simulated phishing, where you send someone a simulated phishing test. That is, and you're reporting back on the results. It's actually considered employee monitoring. And so you may want to update your employee monitoring section to talk about simulated phishing test if you need to do that. Talk to your lawyer to see whether you need to do that. You need to tell every employee what the risk is of social engineering and phishing, right? That it can include unauthorized, allowing hackers to get unauthorized system access, denial of service, data exfiltration, ransomware, stolen intellectual property, fines, financial harm, So, you need to let them know that, some people may be aware and still not care about phishing or social engineering. You need to let them know why it's important. Say the existence of our organization is dependent upon you, stopping phishing, among other things. And I think you do need to, include some special definitions, like, you need to define what social engineering is, what phishing is, what ransomware is, what CEO wire fraud is, which we'll cover, and smishing and vishing and patching. You'd be amazed. About every fourth or fifth talk I give in the public, somebody will come up to me afterwards and go, "Roger, what did you mean by patching?" And the first time that was asked of me, I laughed because I thought they were making a joke, but they weren't. And now I get asked it so much, I know it's not a joke. So just keep in mind that not everybody knows the terms like phishing and vishing and spear phishing and whaling or whatever it might be, and patching. They may not know. And so you want to define those definitions in your documents, in your acceptable use policy or some other documents, so that everybody has a common understanding. If you say, "Hey, we need to fight phishing," they need to understand that you're, talking about, some sort of con and email, and not talking about fishing out in the ocean. Could be. And here's a really, here to me is a good example of phishing. Phishing is the process of somebody that's masquerading as a brand or person that you otherwise would trust more than if you knew it was a Nigerian scammer, So they're masquerading as somebody you might trust more, trying to acquire unauthorized information or create a desired action, such as having the person reveal their password or social security number, or to clicking on a document that installs a Trojan horse program. But this is, I think, is a fairly good definition of phishing if you don't have one else, which is, again, the process of someone maliciously masquerading as a trusted entity to acquire unauthorized information or create a desired action that is contrary to the victim or their organization's self-interest, or simply put, a con. They're trying to con you. And let them know that phishing and social engineering can come a whole bunch of different ways. It's most likely, most people are used to an email, but it can be done in person. It can be done on chatting and SMS. It can be done in social media. It can be someone calling you over your phone and trying to scam you through a voice call. So lots of different ways that social engineering and phishing happens. And it's con artists. They're claiming to be from companies like Microsoft or Google or Facebook or PayPal or something like that, or the IRS or law enforcement. They're claiming to be coworkers and bosses and, kids and parents and that sort of stuff. Whatever, again, they might think that you might, find a believable, plausible scenario. But you want to make sure that when you're teaching your employees, that you teach them about the common ways, the common, what we call red flags of social engineering. I'll show you a poster in a minute that you can download and use. But you want to teach them all about, hey, what are the signs of phishing? A phishing email is typically, or a phishing message is typically a message that arrives unexpectedly. The victim was not expecting it to come. And then it's asking them to perform an action or do something that could harm their own interest if it was malicious. But also many times phishing emails have weird email addresses, strange or unusual, unexpected subjects and things like that. They're asking you to input your password or something like that. Those are the sort of common signs of social engineering you want to teach them. And actually, if you want to, you can go to this link and download a PDF that has, I think, 22 signs of red flags of social engineering. So, it talks about stuff about strange subjects, strange email addresses, typos being in the email, potentially harmful attachments or URL hyperlinks and that sort of stuff. This is a really good poster that you can send to anybody, or you can print up and put in the office. It's up to you. But the social engineering red flags there, you need to tell people what to do if they detect a phishing email. In most cases, in most organizations, you don't want them just to delete the phishing email. You probably want them to report it to, the help desk or the IT security desk or whatever the phishing, reporting hotline is. We love when people use our Phish Alert button. That's a software package you can download that installs in Outlook and Gmail, but allows them just, if they see a suspicious email, they can highlight that email, open that email, and then say, Phish Alert, and it will send it to a common email address. But you don't want to teach people that they don't want to click on the links inside of a suspected phishing email, or they definitely want to hover and try to make sure they can read the URL before they click on it. That when in doubt, if something seems strange, they should call the legitimate sender or go to the legitimate website, and don't trust the links in the email. When in doubt, chicken out and research it before you do it. And again, most of the time you don't want someone just to delete a phishing email. You want them to report it. And that's because, your company could be underway in some big type of phishing attack, and you wouldn't know that everybody's being targeted or your C-levels are being targeted if people aren't reporting it. I've been at companies that have been under sustained multi-hour big time phishing attacks from Russia and China and stuff. And the IT team didn't know that they were under attack for hours because everybody just kept deleting them and not reporting them until finally someone reports it, like, oh my God, we're under attack and we got to shut down email, or at least suck out all the bad emails or whatever it might be. And so again, you want to tell employees what to do, what actions to take. Like we kind of tell people, tell them to click on the Phish Alert button. And you want to tell people that they should report possible phishes, even if they're not sure if it's a phish, that if it's suspicious enough that they're not sure, they should report it instead of clicking on it. And let them know that they're not going to get in trouble for reporting a suspected phish, or even clicking on, suppose somebody clicks on a link in a phishing email and then later on thinks, oh, was that a phishing email? You should let them know that you have a culture, healthy acceptance of people reporting things. You don't want people to be scared to report something. Like I do know that there's some companies out there that will fire people first offense for clicking on a phishing email or link. And I think that's just crazy because you're teaching your employees not to report what they think is a suspected phishing attack. And then again, what is your company going to do if someone's been successfully phished? Like at KnowBe4, if someone gets phished and involved, if they got tricked into providing their login name and password, even if it was a simulated phish, we require that the person change their passwords because we assume if they got tricked with this simulated phishing email, that they could have been tricked out of their password by a real phishing email. And we just say that's part of the penance, that you got to change your password. We think if someone fails a real phishing attack or a simulated phishing attack, that they should get training, right? And people that don't fall for simulated phishing tests or don't fall for real phishing tests, they shouldn't have to take as much training as somebody that's falling for the simulated phishing test and falling for the real phishing. And sometimes people's, whether they do or don't successfully reply or report phishing attacks or simulated phishing attacks, could even be tied to their annual review. I know one company, the CEO gives everybody who successfully reports all the phishing attacks, including simulated phishing attacks, and doesn't fall for one, those employees get $2,000 added at the end of the year, which is very expensive to give everybody a $2,000 bonus. But the CEO said to me, hey, it's really cheap compared to having ransomware. Ransomware would be in the hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. And so this $2,000 increase per employee isn't that bad at all. So again, but you want to communicate in the documentation what you're going to do if somebody is successfully phished, real phish or simulated phish, and what, if they, especially if it happens multiple times. And again, we're very big believers in more carrot and less stick. We don't believe that you should harshly punish people or fire them or whatever. Although, there are exceptions where you got some people that just don't care and keep getting phished, and maybe there becomes some other method, negative method you need to do to train them. And what's IT? You need to document ahead of time to IT. If an employee is successfully phished, what does IT do? How do they respond to that? When would they, if someone's phished, when would they say, hey, we've got to do a full incident response, or we need to format and clean that computer, or we need to force that employee to change their password, or whatever it might be, or do we need to update our policies and training when too many people are missing something? So the idea is that you should have that documented, and everybody should know what you do when you do it, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. And certainly, we think that you should be doing at least monthly security awareness training. We think you should do a big, long security awareness training webinar or video every year, maybe 15 to 45 minutes each year. And then each month they get smaller, like 1 to 3 to 5 minute videos or webinars on how to be aware of the latest threats. But you want to tell your employees that, hey, we do security awareness training. You're going to have to, we do simulated phishing tests, once a month. We're going to do a required training that you have to go to, once a month or whatever it might be. And then tell them how you do that training, who you do the training with. Like, do you do it with KnowBe4 or, somebody else? You don't want there to be any surprises. And again, you want to have specific policies that try to help mitigate successful phishing, like telling all users that they should hover over all URLs if they can to verify it before they click on it, that they should not install unauthorized software, and that they should never give their logon credentials in response to an email or call. Tell them our help desk will never call you and ask for your logon credentials. And really, again, if you can use multi-factor authentication to protect valuable data and systems, that's even better because you're trying to prevent the badness from getting to the end user in the first place. Another example policy is to prevent CEO wire fraud, or they call this business email compromise. And these are where either it's a fake invoice that's coming, that someone pays a fake invoice. That literally many businesses have lost hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars paying these fake invoices. Or the boss, someone claiming to be your boss, is saying that they need to talk to you, and they need, to get a login name, or for you to create an invoice or send money because the deal's closing. You can create a policy update that says you should never, send money or change bank wiring instructions or whatever, anytime it comes from an unexpected request, anytime someone tells you, I'm the CEO and I need a bunch of gift cards, or I need you to send this check here or pay this invoice. If it's unexpected, the person that gets that request should never do it. It should be in your policy saying never do, an unexpected request, for things that could be financial harm, and that you must always, verbally verify it with a legitimate requester at a known good phone number before they go ahead with it. And again, to be clear, if someone fails real phishing case or a simulated phishing test, we don't think they should be fired. We actually have some customers that say, yes, first time offense to get fired. We think that actually makes you more likely to be compromised. Instead, we just think that as people fail phishing or simulated phishing tests, they should be giving more and longer training until the failures decrease. And you can do things like in my company, KnowBe4. I actually, was doing pretty good, hadn't been phished. I got phished my first day, but then years went by before I ever got successfully phished. But then 1 month, and this is during the COVID times, like in 2019, I got successfully phished 2 or 3 times right in a row, like within 2 weeks. And my company has in their phishing policy that, if you fail 3 phishing tests within a year, you actually have to get personal counseling. And I met with a friend of mine, I knew him, but he came to me in a personal capacity and said, Roger, what's going on? Why are you failing? I was moving, I was stressed, I was doing too much at once. And he's like, hey, you got to slow down and maybe make a rule for a little while that you never click on any link, that comes in an email or something. But actually it worked. The personal counseling from my friend and the suggestions that he made actually made me far less likely to be phished. I didn't fall for a phishing test for like years. I was so proud of myself, although I fell for one about a month ago out of the blue. You know what I was doing? I was doing too much and I wasn't being mindful. But anyways, if you have a consequence document, like if it's a possibility someone could be fired because they failed phishing test, you need to put that in the document, and how many phishing things does it take, or can they get in trouble? Can they be let go? Can they be suspended? Can their computer be locked down? If you've got, consequences, positive or negative, what's a positive consequence? Maybe if they don't fall for a simulated phishing test, they get money or they get to have a pizza party or something like that. But again, it's nice to communicate those in policy. And of course, remember, any adds, deletes, changes to any of your policies need to be reviewed by senior management and legal before implementing, because I don't work at your company, and I'm not a lawyer, nor did I play a lawyer and sleep at a Holiday Inn. So make sure legal reviews that, management legal, before you change it. Technical controls, there's all types of technical controls, and they can be implemented on the host devices. You can implement it on your network. It can be implemented in a cloud service. It can be on inbound traffic, outbound traffic. But here, we're going to go through a bunch of common technical defenses. The most common technical defense against phishing and stuff like that is some sort of malware mitigation. Traditionally, antivirus software will try to stop some of your phishing attacks, although not so much. Antivirus is good for detecting malicious files, maybe malicious attachments or something like that. Although antivirus is a little bit old school. What we're seeing today that works more effectively for today's threats is known as endpoint detection and response software. It's kind of a newer, updated version of the anti-malware. And we're just seeing more success with things, endpoint detection response software would be something like CrowdStrike or SentinelOne or something like that. We're seeing a lot of people have success with that. Although Google Virus Total is kind of cool too. If you go to virustotal.com, you can submit any file or link to it. And over 75 antivirus engines will scan that file or link that you submit and see if it's malicious. It's not perfect, but it's better than any single. One single antivirus engine may miss a malware link or something, but when you're throwing it against 70, 75 antivirus engines, they tend to be a lot more accurate. Of course, intrusion detection systems, host intrusion detection, network intrusion detection systems, those are also good malware mitigation schemes to implement. And of course, you need firewalls and VPNs. I actually don't think firewalls and VPNs stop that much malware these days, but you pretty much just have to have it. Like you have to have seatbelts in a car, you have to have firewalls, you have to have VPNs. That can't hurt, but don't expect them to really stop most things. I tell you, just for Windows systems, a quick little hint, is I like using Microsoft's Process Explorer. If you go to sysinternals.com, that's actually a Microsoft website that has a whole bunch of what's known as sysinternal tools created by CTO Mark Russinovich. Microsoft's Azure CTO Mark Russinovich created the sysinternal tools, and they have one called Process Explorer. I run it on my own Windows system. This only works for Windows. But when you run that, you can tell it to check Google's virus total for all the running processes, and they'll tell you how many antivirus engines out of the, today I think it's 75 antivirus engines, think that something that's running on your PC is or isn't malicious. Although I will tell you, if it says like 1 out of something, like in this sample here is like 1 out of 58 engines or 68 engines thinks that it's something, if it's 1 out of something, it's almost never a virus or a Trojan or whatever. But if it says 2 or more, then almost always truly malicious there. Anyways, I like this. I've got some links to it there. I love this tool, Process Explorer on Windows machines. I use it on my personal Windows computers. So I put it on friends' computers because, but then, you know, once you get it installed and running and hooked up and everything, which takes about 5 minutes altogether, once you do that, if someone's wondering if their computer's infected with malware, literally it just takes 1 click, and 5 seconds later they know whether they have malware or not. Email, your all email clients have email protections to prevent spam and social engineering from getting to end users. What I would say there is really just make sure you don't mess with the defaults. The defaults on most email clients are sufficient to try to help you to stop some social engineering and phishing. Things like a really common email client protection is where they'll block files from being automatically downloaded that are linked to in an email. Most modern email clients today will not allow that email to automatically download content, and that's good. And what I would say is don't disable that. That's a good thing. It means you have to go in the email and go, show me all content if you want to see something, but just know that most email, even legitimate email coming from vendors, oftentimes has embedded content or embedded links that points to different content. And if it's a malware or it's a phishing or spam email, that content that you download could be malicious. And so just stick with the email client protection and don't disable the default. That's what I tell most people for email clients and browser protections. You can always make them stronger, but I don't necessarily care that you make email and browsers stronger than the defaults. I just say don't mess with the defaults or don't go weaker than the defaults. A lot of people end up getting infected or compromised because they lessen the default controls that were on their email client or browser client. So again, just for my email and browser recommendations is, there's strongly configured email protections on most clients. They're often enabled by default. Don't mess things up. I'm certainly a big believer in multi-factor authentication. Instead of just using a login name and password, about half of social engineering and phishing tries to get an end user to provide their login name and password. Well, if you've told them that they have to use multi-factor authentication, then about half of social engineering and phishing just isn't going to work. Although we do recommend you use phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication, and unfortunately, most multi-factor authentication is phishable, and we would rather you use some of the good forms like FIDO, F-I-D-O, YubiKeys or something, because they're phishing resistant. So again, you should enable phishing resistant MFA whenever you can to protect valuable data and systems. Just don't think that you're perfectly protected. Too many people using multi-factor authentication think they can't be hacked. That's not true. I can hack personally. I can hack any MFA solution at least 3 or 4 or 5 ways, and many of them 10, 11, 12 ways. There's good MFA and bad MFA, and unfortunately, most of what people are using today is phishable MFA. And if you're trying to stop phishing, it's better to use phishing-resistant MFA whenever you can. And if you go, Roger, I don't know what the difference is between good and bad MFA, we got lots of stuff to help you. I've got some links to like KnowBe4's multi-factor authentication web portal. You go there, got lots of information about MFA, the good and the bad of MFA, and how you can protect yourself. There's even a free 41-page hacking MFA, although I think it was called Hacking Second Two-Factor Authentication at the time. You can download that. It's a free book. There's a webinar on how to hack MFA and how to prevent being hacked if you use MFA. You can go there. And we even have a MFA assessment tool where you can find out if the MFA solution you're using, how it can be hacked. And again, a lot of people go, Roger, what's phishable MFA or what's not phishable? I've got links to that. So I've got 4 links here. And if you're interested in what MFA is phishing resistant, it's that second link, Roger's My List of Good Strong MFA. If you go to that link there, I literally have a list of every type of either vendor, brand, or type of MFA that is phishing resistant. I got lots of other articles that tell you why it's so important to use phishing resistant MFA. And I say, don't use easily phishable MFA. And unfortunately, that's most MFA. There's some good articles you can go read about that topic. I also think everybody should be using a password manager. You should use multi-factor authentication, phishing resistant multi-factor authentication whenever you can to protect valuable data and systems. And when you can't use MFA, you should use a password manager to create and use your passwords. And that's because password managers allow you to create and use truly random complex passwords that are different across all websites and services. And if you don't use a password manager, that is not true. Let me say that again. You should be using a password manager, and that's because password managers allow you to use easily unique, truly random, complex passwords across all websites and services. And for that reason alone, you and everybody else should be using a password manager. And of course, you may say, well, Roger, can't password managers be hacked? Yes, you should still use them. And if you're interested in why I'm saying all that, I do have a 1-hour webinar called The Truth About Password Managers that I have a link about at the bottom of the screen. Another type of technical control is known as red-green systems. This is where some businesses will give you a system that can only be used for work and only for the work systems, and another system that can be used for any of your personal emails or going on the internet. So they have what's called red-green systems. And again, that means that you have either 2 devices, 2 physical devices, or 2 virtual machines or something like that. One where you do all your work and that doesn't go out to the internet and doesn't do personal emails, and another one where you go out to the internet and do personal stuff. I will say that it's expensive to do this option because you're providing either 2 devices versus 1 device, or you're doing multiple virtual machines, and that costs money and that takes resources, and it's double the amount of licenses potentially. And, so it can be expensive to do red-green systems. But I do know that, people that have been able to implement them, it does decrease the risk of social engineering against an organization. It can't get rid of all risk, but the companies that do that, as expensive as it is, they do decrease your risk. Although I've also become kind of a fan of an operating system called Qubes. You can see that name at the very bottom of the slide there, Qubes. You can go to QubesOS.org or something like that. But it's a free operating system that allows you to run multiple virtual machines for every single application. You can run a different virtual machine tied to a hypervisor that is for each application. But to the end user, it just looks like one desktop, but they don't realize that every icon is pointing to a separate virtualized instance of that particular application. So if their browser gets compromised, it doesn't infect the system or their email or whatever. It's kind of cool. Eventually, decades in the future, every operating system will be like Qubes OS. But Qubes OS is free today if you want to try it, although it's Linux-based, so you kind of got to know Linux. Everybody should have these 3 global phishing protection standards enabled, called Sender Policy Framework, or SPF, Domain Keys Identified Email, DKIM, or DMARC, which is Domain-Based Message Authentication Reporting and Conformance. Every company, every organization should have SPF, DKIM, and DMARC enabled, both on the sending and the receiving side. These are global anti-phishing protection standards that you should have enabled. And if you're not sure, go find out and make sure you have them enabled. SPF looks at what's called the 5321 mail from address. When someone sends you an email and you open it, you're not actually seeing the 5321 mail from address. That's what you'll get if you do, let me reply to this email. So that email may be different than the email that you're seeing on your screen. The email address you're seeing on your screen could be what we call the friendly form address, which literally can be anything. Or it could be what's called the 5322 display from email address. The 5321 address is, again, what happens when you hit reply to an email. It's in the email header and you may not see it, but that's what Sender Policy Framework verifies, that if an email comes to you, that it's coming from the mail from address that it claims to be from. And DKIM, when it's enabled, that verifies the 5322 email address. So SPF and DKIM together verify these two real email addresses called the 5321 and the 5322 address. And every email that is sent out with SPF and DKIM will get little markings that say whether it passed or failed the SPF, DKIM, or DMARC checks. Again, and you'll see DMARC. DMARC is kind of a policy standard, although it applies to the 5322 address. But essentially, if you get an email that fails the SPF or DKIM check, if the DMARC standard's enabled by the sender's domain, it will tell someone receiving an email that fails either SPF or DKIM what to do with the email, which is hopefully to throw that email away. It could have reached you an error. It could have failed SPF and DKIM because it was configured incorrectly. But if you as someone reading an email, and this is in the email headers, typically the things that are reading DMARC and SPF and DKIM are the email servers or maybe email clients, and it's not you personally. But if you were to go look into, if you received an email, and you can do that right now, you can open up any email you have, go into the email header, and you'll see SPF pass or fail, DKIM pass or fail, DMARC pass or fail. But what DMARC says is that if you as a receiver get an email that fails the SPF or DKIM check, then you should, how you should treat that email, which again is hopefully to reject it and throw it away because you couldn't trust it. All three of these global phishing standards, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, they work using DNS. So a sender has to have these SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records in DNS, and then any receiver downloading an email that claims to be from that protected domain can verify whether the email really is from an email server in that protected domain. So it uses DNS, and if you're going to enable SPF, DKIM, and DMARC for your company's or your organization's domains, you need to create at least one DNS record for SPF, one DNS record for DMARC, one SPF record for DKIM, and et cetera, and sometimes some other stuff. But then when someone gets an email, you can look in the header if you want to, and you can see whether or not it passed the SPF, DKIM, or DMARC checks. You'll see in this example here, it was an email claiming to be from SunTrust Bank, but it wasn't from SunTrust Bank. It was actually from harlanclark.com. That's that 5322 address, the harlanclark.com. This really was an email sent on behalf of SunTrust. I had ordered some checks, and Harlan Clark was the company that was fulfilling the check order. But I just want to make sure it really was from Harlan Clark. When I opened up the email header there, you can see it says SPF pass, FPS pass. And where is it from? harlanclark.com. And you can even see where it says DKIM pass in there as well. And if you look harder, you might even see the DMARC pass, that sort of stuff. Here's an example of an email. This is a phishing email that was saying Microsoft Online, and they couldn't even spell online correctly. But it's claiming to be from Microsoft, and they wanted me to click on something. But you can see that it was claiming to be from Microsoft, but it really came from a domain called augustdeboozy.com, and so it failed. So anytime you see an email that fails either SPF, DKIM, or DMARC checks, it's a bad thing. It can be because of a misconfiguration. It can be a legitimate email that failed because of someone didn't know how to configure SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. But more than likely, it means that it's a phishing attack of some sort, and you don't want to do it. Domain keys, identified email. It actually signs when you have DKIM enabled. It actually signs when you have a DKIM enabled email server. It actually signs every outgoing email with a DKIM digital signature. And again, you can kind of see the example here that Harlan Clark email previously where it was SPF pass. Well, the DKIM pass says the signature was verified. It was sent by a server that digitally signed it, and then the receiver is able to download what's called the DKIM public key and verify that the email is correctly signed. But you can, if you see fail there, it's not a good thing. And again, DMARC is a sender enables DMARC to tell a receiver that if you get an email that claims to be from one of my protected domains and it fails SPF or DKIM, how should you treat it? And the default option or what you should make it be is that you reject the email and that nobody gets it. Although the majority of the world says quarantine, which means, okay, I'm not going to delete the email. I'm going to put it in a quarantine folder or spam folder or something like that. Or you can say none, which and let me say, a lot of people's DMARC policy says what's called P equals none, how to treat it. It's kind of weird. You go through all the hard work to enable SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, and then you tell people, if you get one that's failed, just treat it regular, don't reject it. You want to work up your DMARC policy, so you're telling people, if you get an email from me claiming to be from me, but it fails SPF and DKIM, reject that email, delete that email, don't let it get to the end user. And the way that it kind of all goes together is that a sender sends an email, sends it through their email server. If their email server is DKIM enabled, it will sign that email and give it a DKIM header. And then it sends that email. Your sending email server will send it to the receiver's receiving email server. That email server, if it's DMARC, DKIM, and SPF enabled, will download the sender's DNS records that has their DMARC, SPF, and DKIM records. Download it. The receiver's email server will apply all standard email checks. Then it'll verify DKIM. Then it'll verify SPF. Then they'll download the sender's DMARC policy, which tells it how to treat an email that fails either of those two checks, the SPF or DKIM check. And hopefully, again, they're rejecting an email that fails the SPF, DKIM, or DMARC checks. Although, again, we see a lot of quarantine, which means a failed email will end up in somebody's spam box or quarantine folder or whatever. You should, if you don't know if you have these enabled, you should enable. Every company should enable SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. They're out there, they're free. Another type of technical tool, all the content filtering. Most people's email systems today have a lot of anti-phishing, anti-spam content filtering built in already. Internet browsers, like Microsoft Edge and Google Chrome, kind of have domain checks built into them, and they're always looking at the content that's coming in. But you want to make sure that you have, at least one, if not multiple, content filtering, solutions in place. Spam filter, phishing filter, and email filters, and content filtering, which may filter out like violent websites or pornography or something like that. You need to have one or more content filters enabled. A lot of times, your email, if you use Gmail or Hotmail or whatever, Office 365, they usually actually have some content filtering in there. But a lot of people like to do an additional adjunct content filter in there. You do want to block malicious file attachments if you can, things like EXEs and screensaver files and DLLs. By default, most email systems, especially Microsoft Office 365 and Google Gmail, already block potentially bad malicious file attachments, and you can go to each of those vendors to find a list of what files they think are malicious. It's usually around 40 or 50 file types. Sometimes you want to block potential malicious file links like file:// // If you want to see what that attack is there, just know that if you see file:// // that could be something that's malicious. And so it's a good idea to filter out emails that have a link to begin with file:// / in it. There is another thing called file attachment and URL detonation or sandboxing. There's different email systems that when you get an email or you get a link in an email or a file attachment in an email, it will actually open that file or download the link into a safe place, called a detonation sandbox. And there's a lot of vendors that provide this, Microsoft, Barracuda, Proofpoint, Bluecoat, FireEye. I'm sure at least one of those has probably been bought up by somebody else and named something else. But again, they will try to inspect any file attachment or link that's sent to you. Like here's an example of Microsoft Office 365 where I got this email and I clicked on it to open. It's like, hey, there's an ATP scan in place. I think ATP is Advanced Threat Protection Scan, and it's telling me we're making sure that your file attachments are safe. When it's through, it then puts the file attachment in place of that message, and you can download and open it. These file attachment URL detonation software products are not 100% accurate. Nothing's 100% accurate, but they're kind of nice and they do kind of work most of the time. And so I'm a big fan of them. If you can get one of these sandbox products, they will protect you from some malware attacks. Blacklisting, or what's now called blocklisting, and that's probably blocklisting is a far more appropriate name for it. is that you can actually have a list of URLs that have been previously determined to be bad, and you can block any links or emails from that bad domain. You can download a master block list there. I've got a link there, which that link has 108 other block lists where you can download and put them in your email server. That way, again, if someone sends you an email that is originating from a domain that's on one of those block lists, like a really popular one is either Spam House or DNSBL or OS or OO Spam or Google Safe Browsing. Again, you can enable those. You can take these block lists and then put them on your email server, and your email server will automatically turn away any email or if you're browsing content, browsing content that is on that block list. A lot of these services also do what's called reputation services, where they will say, has this particular domain been reported as sending spam or malware? A lot of vendors do that. CrowdStrike, Microsoft, Google, they all have this, all have these reputation services that score emails and score domains coming in saying that is or isn't a good one. They're not highly accurate. As a matter of fact, I see more misses than hits, but it's a good thing to have, and it can't hurt to have your reputation service. DNS checks, I've heard about this one. I've never seen it implemented in software. The people I know that have this have implemented it with a custom script. But the idea is that if you get an email that arrives from a domain that's less than a day old, it's probably malicious. And I would say that's pretty accurate. Very few people are actually registering and creating domains and then sending emails within 24 hours of creating the domain. So if you have the capability of telling your email server clients reject any email that comes from a domain that's less than 24 hours old, that actually works kind of well. I just wish it was built into some of the email server products. That'd be kind of nice. Network traffic pattern analysis. That is, you should know where the network traffic goes to and from on your network. Like, most servers don't talk to other servers. Most servers don't talk to every client in your network. Most clients don't talk to other clients. And if you have a network traffic pattern analysis tool like FireEye or CrowdStrike or Aruba or Cisco or Corelight or Bro, you can actually look for signs of malicious network traffic that looks suspicious, and then follow up on it or block it. So that's a good thing to look for. Of course, we do believe in having fantastic security awareness training. We think that you should train your employees on how to recognize different types of threats, and then do simulated phishing tests. And we think you should do this at least once a month, if not more. As a matter of fact, training should be once a month. Simulated phishing should probably be once a week, and where you're training your employees of how to recognize, catch, and report different types of phishing attacks. We do know that our customers that follow our advice, which is training and simulated phishing at least once a month, they get their phish prone rate. That's the rate of employees that will click on a phishing attack, down from about a third of attacks to 5% or below. Our customers that do simulated phishing tests once a week get that 5% figure down to 2% sometimes. But since phishing is the #1 way that people are compromised, using testing and simulated phishing to get that rate down of what someone will click on a phishing link significantly protects your company. And we believe in using a combination of posters and games and videos and human stories where they're telling you about the time they got phished. You should try a little bit of everything. And we do like to emphasize that, IQ is not a good indicator of how likely you are to be phished or not. There have been Nobel Physics Prize winners that understood quantum physics that got phished out of $1 million. Doctors, lawyers, anybody can be phished. There is, how smart you are doesn't mean whether you will or won't be phished. The biggest indicator of whether you'll be phished or not is whether you're aware of a particular type of scam. So train so people are aware of scams. We say train like you're a marketer. Think about all the commercials you see when you watch TV. You've seen them over and over again. Well, that's how you want to train with security awareness training. We want it to be frequent, redundant, and entertaining. There's a reason why those television commercials, most of them make you laugh, and that you see them all the time. And that's because it makes you remember things. So train like you're a marketer. And you want to train people with a longer training when they're first hired, maybe up to 45 minutes of training. And then every month you give them a little bit of training, maybe some monthly simulated phishing attacks and shorter trainings. And then every year thereafter, on some annual date, everybody gets longer training again, and then more training if they fail simulated phishing test. And you can make the training different per group, per role. Like business email compromise scam training, where you're trying to tell someone not to pay a fake invoice. Well, most of your employees don't pay invoices, so you probably don't need to give them, anti business email compromise scam training. Or it makes sense to give around tax time in America. That's like for personal tax around April. We see a lot more scams involve asking people for the Social Security numbers and W-2 information. So it makes sense to give people that sort of training when they're worried about, around that time of the year. And then you can spearfish your employees using anything that's fair game that you see in the public realm. Or you can even try private information to see if they might fall for something, acting like the phishing attack came from with some insider information. You don't have to just do generic testing. Again, download our social engineering red flags folder poster so that you can use that against them. We also think it's a good idea, like with our system, that if someone fails a simulated phishing test, that they get told right away what they failed. That's a good thing. Say, hey, this is what you should have seen that should have indicated that you failed this phishing test. We believe in changing up the types of things that you treat people. We even have a category called Scams of the Week, which is based upon some of the most popular phishing scams we've seen that week. And if you sign up for that, that's the types of scams that people will get. That way you're keeping it very up to date, and with it, different things happen at different periods of time. Again, give your users a quick, easy way to report any suspected phishing attack. We like the free Phish Alert button, but however you do it, teach your employees that anytime they see an email that might be a suspicious, phishing email or something, they should report it so people can respond to it. Get and use good data. Certain people will click on simulated phishing test more often, and some people never do. And you need to identify who are the people that are good and who are the people that need more training. So that the people that need more training get more training. Again, train. Once a year, twice a year training in education is not enough. We know that if you train once a year, like a lot of companies do, it's almost like you didn't even do the training. We don't start to see significant decrease in risk until you're testing and training at least once a quarter, and really it should be once a month. And certainly if someone fails a simulated phishing test, they should be given on-the-spot training right away so they get to learn there. Other real-life hints: teach your end users how to read URLs, so that if you get an email claiming to be from Microsoft, they should know to hover over that link and verify, did it really come from Microsoft? Like in this case, it's claiming to be from Microsoft, but it came from a domain called devopsnw.com. So teach your end users how to read URLs and to hover over things before they click them. Like this email looks like it's from LinkedIn.com, but it isn't. It's from LLLinkedIn.com. Or LinkedIn.com. Either way, not a real email from LinkedIn.com. And the same thing here. These are emails claiming to be from Bank of America and Microsoft and Maersk and stuff like that. They really aren't from those companies. Teach your employees how to know the difference between a real URL and a fake URL and how to handle them. And if you're not sure how to do that, we've got another handy PDF, the 12 most common rogue URL tricks. You can download this PDF. You can send it to them, print it out, and teach them how to spot rogue URLs. Also, we think that anytime someone catches a real phishing attack or a simulated phishing attack, that you should send them an email or a message going, thank you so much. You want to give positive reinforcement that they've caught and helped protect your company. Don't just yell at them when they miss something. Congratulate them when they hit something. We're also big believers in your company of identifying people that are good and understand how to fight phishing, the heroes or champions, that you identify people that want to help you spread your message to protect each other. So you create this champions program or hero program, that you train them a little bit and you tell them how to interface with different employees within the company. They can help create a culture where you have a healthy level of skepticism. When someone gets an email that looks like it might be a phishing email, they'll learn how to better spot it. We know that when you train people, and employees that are in your company, those are many, many times better than just a video or, a video message or a poster or something like that. So identify your heroes and your champions, train them, and then send them out there to help get your training message. With that said, I've gone through 86, 87 slides. My name's Roger Grimes. We don't have time to take questions, but if you email me at rogerg@noble4.com, rogerg@noble4.com, I promise I will respond to your email as soon as I can. And you can follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter, where I write at least a couple of times a week about how to fight social engineering and other issues like MFA and passwords and all that other stuff. With that said, thanks so much for putting up with me, and continue to go fight the good fight. See you next time.